Well, today is my 40th birthday. Actually, tomorrow is my 40th birthday because you guys are watching this in the future. So a few months back, someone recommended that for my 40th birthday, I make a video with my 40 favorite movies of all time. And I thought, that's a good idea. I think I'm going to do that. So today I'm going to provide my 40, that's actually 10 fingers, 40 favorite movies of all time. Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. And today we are talking about the movies that I love the most. As we go into this is a purely subjective list. It is not my picks for the 40 best movies of all time. These are the movies that meant the most to me for entirely personal reasons. Maybe it's when I saw them, what they meant to me, how they made me fall in love with films, or they're just goofy, cheesy movies that I love to rewatch over and over again. Every time I do a video like this, someone's always like, I disagree. Well, of course you do. You're not me. We're all gonna have totally different lists, and we should have totally different lists. Also, one more thing before we get started. There is a companion video to this over on my Patreon page with 10 more of my favorite movies of all time, so they get my top 50 favorite movies of all time. Join at any level, and you can unlock that video as well as hundreds of additional exclusive videos over there, and it's a nice birthday present for me if you decide to do that. With that said, let's get started. Kicking things off at number 40 is Memento. Now, this is Christopher Nolan's first film that had a budget. Now, he did a movie before this that he basically self-financed and made with his buddies. This is his first professional shoot, and all of his talent as a director and writer are fully on display, as it's a movie that's told in reverse order in order to put the audience in the same position as the lead character. He can't make new memories. And so it's this disorienting way of telling a story that just creates such a unique experience that matches the central narrative and matches the state of our lead character.
I have this condition.
A condition?
It's my memory.
Amnesia.
No. It's different from that.
It also is a movie that came out right after I graduated high school. And so right in those pivotal years where I was falling in love with film, I discovered this movie, and Christopher Nolan has been one of my favorite directors ever since. Number 39, Forrest Gump. Now, this is one of these movies that came out during a very different era in cinema where dramas could be big, gigantic blockbusters. So this was one of the biggest films of 1994, even though it's basically a drama about this guy's life. And it was one of the very first times, or maybe the first time, that I saw a Best Picture winner before it won Best Picture. Like, as a 13-year-old, whatever I was when this movie came out, I guess it would have been 12 when it actually came out, went and saw it, absolutely loved it, and then it went on to win Best Picture. And so it's just one of those movies that once again showed me that movies could be more than animation and people being shot with machine guns and big gigantic explosions, that you can tell stories that are just compelling. And rewatching this movie last year, the thing that really stuck out is Lieutenant Dan has one of the greatest character arcs of all time, and he's the side character in the movie. It's so satisfying when you see him at the end of the film and just smiling and standing. It's so satisfying. So this is one of these movies that I loved it when I saw it back in 1994 and still loved it when I rewatched it last year. 38, First Blood. Now, this is the first Rambo movie, and because the sequels kind of turned into these one-man army movies where Rambo won the Vietnam War by himself, they kind of became a parody of themselves. But the first movie is actually just a great thriller about a man with PTSD who's misinterpreted by this small town sheriff that leads to dire consequences. It's a movie that has messaging about how Vietnam vets were treated when they returned from the war.
Is there any law against me getting something here?
Yeah, me.
It's filled with great characters, great performances. It has a lot of emotion. Plus, it has a bunch of great action. And I've said it many times before that Stallone is my favorite actor of all time. His two franchises are Rocky and Rambo, and this is easily the best of the Rambo films. 37, A Fistful of Dollars. People frequently ask me what's my favorite Western of all time, A Fistful of Dollars is my favorite Western of all time. It kicks off the Man with No Name trilogy starring Clint Eastwood and from Sergio Leone, and I actually like this one more than The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and just the simplicity of the story. It was also my introduction to kind of Clint Eastwood and everything, because Back to the Future Part 2 and 3, that they reference this movie, and those ones I went, what's that movie? Well, what's that movie? I got to check that movie out. And so I checked it out, and I loved it. And it's been my favorite Western ever since I saw it way back in the day. But it's a movie that's basically a remake of Yojimbo, the Akira Kurosawa film, just as a Western, as many Westerns of that era were remakes of Akira Kurosawa films, and this is one of them, and it made me have this long phase where I was super duper into Clint Eastwood, and as I've said like 3 times now, my favorite Western of all time. Number 36, I'm going to cheat this one, but it's A Better Tomorrow, The Killer, and Hard Boiled. Whenever I do these favorites list, I want to include as many movies as I can, so I only allow one movie from each franchise so it doesn't get dominated by some of these franchises that I love a bunch of the movies in, like Star Wars, or in the case of this one, basically I wanted my John Woo pick of his heroic bloodshed set of films that he did with Chow Yun-fat. And my favorite of the bunch is A Better Tomorrow. It was their first one that they did. And these movies just have the best action gunplay that I have ever seen. Probably the best overall film of the bunch is probably The Killer. The one with the best gun action is Hard Boiled. And A Better Tomorrow is probably the one that resonates me on a character level a little bit more, with the journey of kind of these returning gangsters showing that they still have all of their skills, everything like that. But these are just awesome action movies that inspired The Matrix, actually inspired a whole bunch of what Hollywood did 10 years after they came out. 35, A Few Good Men, and this is my favorite courtroom movie of all time, and another one of these films that kind of came out right as I was going into my tween years and discovering movies could be more than just entertainment, but that they could have like deep themed messages, character arcs. And so my mom, I think, took me to see this one in the theater, which I was probably a bit too young to see this one in the theater, and thoroughly enjoyed it. But it's also a movie that, as time passed, every time I rewatch it, I think I resonate with it a little bit more, as it's the story about this lawyer that has all the talent to be a great lawyer, but has always chosen the easy path of just doing these plea deals. And then he's given this case where he can't do that, and he has to decide to actually embrace who he is. With and also Tom Cruise's character in it, his personality has a bunch of traits that are a little bit like mine. And the movie's most famous for Jack Nicholson and his performance, and you can't handle the truth, but it's a movie based off an Aaron Sorkin script, based off an Aaron Sorkin play. And so you have all the Aaron Sorkin great dialogue in there. But to me, it's just a great character journey for Tom Cruise's character, as well as a great courtroom drama. 34, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. One of the best blockbusters of this past decade that just did a tremendous job of telling a great tragedy with conflict that feels earned, where the two factions, the humans and the apes, you understand where they're coming from, but they have this very delicate partnership between the two of them, and one person acting, or one character acting out of place, destroys what was being built between the two of them, leading to dire consequences. And it involves apes on horseback with machine guns battling a tank. It's a movie that manages to be able to take something so ludicrous while telling a great story with emotional stakes, drama, tragedy. And there's just something special about what Matt Reeves was able to do with this film and tell a compelling story while having ludicrous spectacle at the exact same time. 33, Mission Impossible, Fallout, or really all the Mission Impossible movies except 2. Once again, I do some of these stand-in movies for an entire franchise that I really appreciate when I can't put 5 movies from a franchise in this list. But I feel like this is one of these franchises just done a great job of regularly reinventing itself, providing incredible spectacle and thrills, whether through the spy stuff or Tom Cruise getting crazier as he gets older. And I think Fallout is the movie that maybe pulls everything together the best by tying back to events of previous films while having emotional stakes, while having physical danger stakes at the exact same time. But I mean, Ghost Protocol has one of the best sequences I have ever seen in a theater with the Dubai Tower sequence. This is just a great, great spy franchise that has been one of the most consistent franchises, except for 2, over the last 25 years. Next up, Spider-Man 2002. Now, I've always loved comic book characters, comic book movies, but the genre started to change around the turn of the century when technology started to make it possible for them to truly immerse you in these comic book worlds and do these fantastical things that prior to the digital era CGI green screen was very difficult to pull off.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
And this movie was the first true blockbuster of that era. X-Men was a hit. Blade was an important hit. This was a super blockbuster that changed the game and took this incredibly popular character and made a hugely popular and great film out of him. And to get very personal with this one, I'm pretty sure this is the first movie I saw in the theater after my dad died. Obviously, movies are a massive part of my life, and I love movies as escapism. And you think about what are some of the most painful moments you can have in your life. Obviously, losing a parent. And I even wonder if one of the reasons that I've always had a soft spot for this movie is when going through one of the hardest times of my life. This was my escape for 2 hours. To just get swept away in this Marvel version of New York. Seeing this compelling story about this teenage boy that gains great powers. And learning that comes with responsibility. And, I think those sorts of movies that you see at just the right time when you need that escape, it really can shape you a little bit and mean a lot to you. That got a little bit heavy. On a lighter note, number 31, While You Were Sleeping. Now, this is just a delightful rom-com from the mid-90s where the year prior, Sandra Bullock had been in the movie Speed. That was a big, gigantic hit, and she was one of the standouts. And so she kind of got on everyone's radar. Is she just a one-hit wonder? Is she actually going to be around for a long time? Next year, While You Were Sleeping comes out, and just everyone absolutely falls in love with her because she's just delightful in this film, put up against Bill Pullman, and it's just one of the great rom-coms of all time. It's one of these movies that I've never met anyone that's seen it that didn't like it. It's just a charming little story about a misunderstanding that leads to this lady ending up in this family where she thinks she's in love with one brother, but maybe she's actually in love with the other brother, and the family just accepts her with all her quirks, their quirks. It's just a delightful, charming little film. Bringing us into the top 30, Bloodsport, the very first R-rated movie I ever saw. Summer of 1989, I was at a sleepover with some of my friends' houses, and they're like, hey, my parents rented Bloodsport. Want to watch Bloodsport? And I was like, I don't know what that is, but there's a guy doing a jump kick on it, so yes. And I watched it then, grossed out at the point in time where a bone snaps out of a guy's leg, but I have loved it ever since.
I did not come this far to stop now. Take it. To enter.
And this is maybe the movie that I've rewatched the most, partially because I watched it a very long time ago and it was on loop late at night on cable when I was growing up. And then partially because it's one of those movies that is just comfort food for me, of just throw this one on in the background late at night when I want to go to bed. But this is like peak Van Damme. It is cheesy 80s. It's a tournament fighter, but it's a really good cheesy 80s tournament fighter that if you're into martial arts films, this is a must watch that just delivers Van Damme in his prime, doing his theme, fighting a whole bunch of different styles of martial artists, and just pulling on all the right hearts, tugging at all the right strings at my heart. If you're into this kind of movie, a lot of you would watch this and just think it's a cheesy disaster. I love it. 29, Unbreakable. M. Night Shyamalan's follow-up to The Sixth Sense is my favorite film that he has ever done. It's a origin story, and I've said it many times before that I love origin stories of becoming, where you see someone in their normal life realize or become something special throughout the course of the film. That to me is just always so compelling and stirring. And Unbreakable is one of the great examples of that. Even beyond that, has kind of tells the story of this guy that feels like he's never lived up to his potential. And those are sorts of things that, I resonate with stories like that, where people discover who they are and finally live up to their potential. I love those types of stories, and I think this one does it so well. Definitely a slower paced, deliberate film, but even as you move into the final twist reveals, I feel like they're earned. I think the movie works if you remove the last scene, and when you add it on there, it gives new meaning to everything that took before, adds new emotion. Some people feel anticlimactic, like they want to see the next scenes that play out after it. I think it's just the perfect way to have that final piece of information you learn that causes you to reinterpret everything that you experienced and adds this whole new emotion in that's heartbreaking. Then we have Home Alone 1, and let's throw in Home Alone 2 as well. I was the perfect age for when this movie first came out. Macaulay Culkin is only like 6 months older than me, and so then watching it, I was the age of Kevin when this movie originally came out, and just remember watching this movie on loop as a child, watching Home Alone 2 on loop as a child, and now that I have kids of my own, they watch this movie on loop throughout the entire year.
Yes! 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 Yes!
We'll get to March and they'll be like, hey, can we watch Home Alone? All right, let's watch Home Alone. And then we'll get to June. They'll be like, can we watch Home Alone? All right, we can watch Home Alone. This is another one of these movies, both 1 and 2, that are some of the movies I have rewatched the absolute most in my entire life.
Keep the change, you filthy animal.
And I think they work during the first 2/3 because Macaulay Culkin is just so good, and there's just something magical about the score, the themes, and then of course they're so fun when you get to the third act and all the excessive violence begins. 27, Halloween. Now, when I was growing up, slasher films were the horror genre of choice. They were the ones that were always playing on late night cable, that when my mom would go to bed, I'd check out the Friday the 13th films or whatever was playing late night on cable. And I think the one that really started it all, the one that influenced a generation of films that were the horror films of my childhood, was Halloween. And it's just one of those examples of like this classic, iconic director, John Carpenter, doing this genre at just the right time, casting just the right actress, that you get that lightning in a bottle of this very simple story that laid the template for 1 bazillion knockoffs that would come over the next 40 years, really. And while it's been copied a zillion times, this was the best of the bunch. Then we have Galaxy Quest, a movie that's both a love letter to Star Trek fans and the fandom, as well as a send-up of them, but in the best, most sincere way possible. And then it's also just a great comedy.
Never give up. Never surrender.
So growing up, some of my earliest childhood memories are of watching Star Trek 4 with my family and getting freaked out by the probe when the probe shows up and running out of the room. And then my sister, mother, and I, we watched Star Trek The Next Generation during its original run. And we went to Star Trek conventions all throughout the 90s. And we didn't go to Comic-Cons. We went to Star Trek conventions that are basically the exact same thing, just niched down to just Star Trek. So when Galaxy Quest came out in 1999, it was just a movie that was designed for us as people that went to the conventions, like in this movie, that followed the fandom of William Shatner and went to a Star Trek convention with William Shatner. This was just so, on so many levels, designed for us. It's a great Star Trek story. It's funny in its own right. And then it so understands the fandom and how to celebrate them while poking fun at them at the exact same time. And then when I got married, I showed it to my wife, who did not watch Star Trek prior to meeting me, of course did not go to Star Trek conventions, and she just watched it, and she thought, that's just a good movie. That's just a fun sci-fi comedy that she had fun with. And now as she's grown to actually like some Star Trek because of being married to me, likes the movie even more. It's an example of potentially a perfect movie. Number 25, Scream. People frequently ask me, what is my favorite horror movie of all time? Scream is my favorite horror movie of all time.
What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
The Kevin Williamson era of slashers that were self-aware and commenting on the previous 20 years of horror films.
Never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back. Get another beer, you want one? Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back.
Those were the movies that were popular during my formative high school years, and the king of all of them was Scream. The one that started that trend was Scream. And here we are 25 years later, and it is just as good. It's so sharp, witty, funny, while being a good slasher movie. It understands how to poke fun at it, much like Galaxy Quest, knows how to poke fun at the genre while being a love letter to it at the exact same time.
Everybody's a suspect.
And so for me, this is just means the most to me because of when it came out, but it's also great. 24, Elf. When it comes to what is my favorite Christmas movie of all time, it's a little bit tough for me because Home Alone is my childhood. But then I think, what's the one that makes me laugh even more? And it is Elf.
You did it! Congratulations!
I just think that this movie is so funny, so quotable.
You disgust me. How can you live with yourself?
Will Ferrell is so endearing. The film is so wholesome on so many different levels. And so it's this movie that came out when I was like 22 years old. And so maybe I should have been in the cynical phase. But it's a movie that it's impossible to be cynical about because it's just so charming and so fun. Then we have The Wedding Singer. People frequently ask me, what is my favorite Adam Sandler film or what is my favorite rom-com? The Wedding Singer. To me, this is just a great late 90s comedy and great rom-com.
You are the worst wedding singer in the world, buddy.
Well, I have a microphone and you don't.
So you will listen to every damn word I have to say!
Where you have two lead characters that have fantastic chemistry with Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore, who went on to do several more movies together because they're just so fun on screen together, that you care about the journeys that they're on. And it picks this time period that is inherently amusing because the 80s were so excessive and so over the top. They're just a fun environment to be in for a comedy like this that's kind of making fun of the time period while also celebrating it at the same time. And so for me, I just find this movie, this pair of characters to be delightful.
I said hip hop, I hip it to the hip it to the hip hip hop.
And can rewatch this movie over and over. 22, The Lion King. Speaking of favorites of all time, The Lion King is my favorite animated movie of all time. I was born at just like the perfect time period because the Disney Renaissance were the Disney animated films of my childhood. And from The Little Mermaid through The Lion King was just such a phenomenal run of movies. And I was the target audience for all of them, and kind of the peak at all of that was The Lion King, a film that has fantastic songs told with kind of like this elegance, and it's like kind of like a remake of Hamlet and Macbeth in its own way, so it has some Shakespearean tragedy in there as well, while being this charming little delightful family film. Add to this, I have some fun memories of seeing a double feature at a drive-in movie theater, where the first movie I saw on one side was The Lion King, and the one I saw on the other side for the second half was True Lies. That was a fun double feature. 21, The Karate Kid. Now, this is just a classic story about a boy in need of a father and a father in need of a son, all centered around a karate tournament. It takes a premise that is rather silly at face value about a group of high school bullies that take karate together who bully a kid, and he learns karate to beat them in a karate tournament. It's a silly concept, but it plays it with such sincerity, with such great performances, that somehow it just becomes this fantastic coming of age story, fantastic story about people finding family and confidence in unusual places.
I promise teach karate.
And a friend.
Fighting always last answer.
And it's an endearing story that here we are 37 years later, and Cobra Kai is one of the most popular shows on streaming currently because something about these characters, about this premise, about these themes, about adult mentors and coming of age stories resonate with people on a deep level, and this is one of these stories that's resonated with me since I was a child. Bringing us into the top 20, Jaws. Now, this is a movie that I had not seen until I met my wife. And I've always loved Steven Spielberg movies, and somehow I'd just never seen Jaws. And my wife loves shark movies. So I meet her, she's like, have you never seen Jaws? This is where you start to realize that you found the right person to spend the rest of your life with, because she was the one that introduced me to Jaws. And of course, I absolutely loved it. And it's an example of another one of these potentially perfect films.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Where through even some of the mistakes or issues they ran onto on set with the shark led to amazing creative decisions where they don't show the shark very much, but it's a movie that slowly builds the tension. It's filled with great, compelling characters, amazing dialogue, and then a young Steven Spielberg who, even at a young age, had all of his skill and talent, was able to tell this amazing story about this small town being attacked by a shark that still to this day is considered one of the best movies of all time. Number 19, Braveheart. Now, along with Forrest Gump, this is another one of these early Best Picture winners that I saw in the theater before it won Best Picture. It was one of those movies that introduced me to prestige, celebrated, awarded movies when I was still in middle school. Now, this one's a little bit more my traditional pace, as it is jam-packed with amazing, epic battles where people's legs are getting chopped off. But aside from the amazing war carnage, it just tells this compelling story. It's a fictionalized version of real-life events, very fictionalized version, but with the story that they do tell, it's the sweeping epic that has failure, love, loss, tragedy, betrayals, people betraying people and realizing their failure. I mean, it just touches on so many big emotions throughout its runtime that it is an amazing, amazing movie. Then we have Pulp Fiction, another movie from that same time period as Forrest Gump and Braveheart. This one being from 1994. I didn't see this one in 1994, but I did remember all the buzz surrounding it. And the buzz in my household was my mom talking about, like, hey, John Travolta's in this one, and he has another dance number like he had in Saturday Night Fever. That was literally my introduction to Pulp Fiction, was my mom being excited that John Travolta was going to dance in it. But obviously, as time has passed, the movie's reputation and what I remember the movie for has changed just a little bit. And this is my personal favorite Quentin Tarantino film. And it's another one of those important movies because when I did discover it in the late 90s, that it showed me a new way of seeing movies, a new way of telling stories. Obviously, if you know my channel, and just by watching this list, you can tell I like big blockbusters, spectacle, traditional types of stories with clear villains, clear heroes, clear character arcs. And then I see this movie, Pulp Fiction, that I loved, that I thought had such amazing dialogue, fascinating characters, but it broke all the rules. Everything about almost every other movie on this list, everything that I would describe why I loved every other movie on this list, Pulp Fiction is the counterexample to all of it, and how you can make a great movie that breaks all the rules, that moves differently, treats characters differently, treats storytelling differently, but is still compelling nonetheless. 17, Predator, the Arnold Schwarzenegger, John McTiernan, late 80s classic. And to me, what's so phenomenal about this film is that it is one of the great Arnold Schwarzenegger films, that he's great in it. But I don't think of it as an Arnold Schwarzenegger film. And that is truly an astounding thing because he's such a dominant personality that he just oozes his unique Arnold charisma and charm. But when I think about Predator, I forget sometimes that he's the star of the movie because John McTiernan is the star of the movie that just tells this compelling action movie that starts as a traditional action movie that turns into this sci-fi survival film as these macho, best at the best mercenary types slowly unravel and lose control of themselves until only the best of the best of the best is remaining to have a showdown with the Predator.
It bleeds. We can kill it.
It's just such a great action movie. It's such a great thriller, but it's also a sci-fi movie, and it's also an Arnold movie. And once again, like several other movies on this list, it's basically a perfect version of the film that it's trying to be. That will bring us to The Matrix. Now, this is a movie that when I first saw it, I didn't immediately fall in love with it. I was like, that was cool, but, you know, all the gunfights are just ripping off all those John Woo movies I've been watching because I'd recently discovered A Better Tomorrow, The Killer, and Hard Boiled. Those were huge influences on this movie. And all the martial arts, that's just all those Jet Li movies I've been watching because I was huge into Asian martial arts films at the times, especially Jackie Chan, but also Jet Li and all of his wire fu, and that's what's in The Matrix. And then I was like, you know, in the plot, it's just like a reworking of like the Terminator mythology with just some different influences. And then as time passed, I realized, wait, that's what makes this movie brilliant. It's like taking all of my favorite things. The Terminator, John Woo action, Asian martial arts films, plus stuff that I'm not even all that into, like anime and stuff like that, just mashes them all together and does something wholly new while drawing from the best and having all these deep philosophical ideas and themes woven seamlessly into the story. And it's a movie that took me a while to realize how brilliant it was. And then as soon as it clicked in my mind, I was like, this thing's brilliant. Then the sequels came out and I lost interest in The Matrix for about a decade. Then I rewatched it and I went, no, this thing is amazing. It's a story of becoming, as I've already told you that I love in this video, that has all my favorite stuff, as I've already told you while talking about The Matrix. I love this movie. And it's one of these movies I keep trying to talk my wife into letting me show it to my son. It's probably a little bit too young, but maybe with a new Matrix movie coming out this month and with them actually showing The Matrix in theaters this month, perhaps, or actually next month, I guess, potentially I can talk my wife into letting him see it, even though he's too young to see it. Speaking of one of my favorite movies of all time that turned into a franchise that has a fourth entry coming out in the year 2021, also Ghostbusters. So just a couple weeks back, Ghostbusters Afterlife came out. I absolutely loved it because it was such a love letter to the fans, just oozing with nostalgia, and I had so much Ghostbusters nostalgia. Now, I was a little bit too young to see the original film or even the second film in the theaters when they first came out, but the real Ghostbusters, the cartoon based off the film, dominated kiddie popular culture during my childhood. So that's one of the first animated shows I just remember watching all the time was the real Ghostbusters. And somewhere in there, of course, also watched Ghostbusters 1 and 2 all the time as a kid. And they're just some of those movies that, the first one, not the second one, it's just lightning in a bottle of just a great concept that's a fun idea for a movie with a fantastic cast and then perfectly balances the comedy and entry-level spook scares and horror to make something special.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
That here we are 37 years later and people still absolutely love this movie. And when this new one came out, people are crying because of the nostalgia during the final act of the film. Number 14, Inception, Christopher Nolan's storytelling magnum opus. Now, he's done a bunch of movies that have meant a whole lot to me, and even more of them will appear on this list. But when it comes to just blowing my freaking mind, Inception is the one that did that the most when it comes to Christopher Nolan's films, or maybe any movie ever, of just taking this concept about dreams and just weaving this super intricate story with multiple layers to it and multiple layers in multiple different senses, all leading up to this final moment that can have multiple different interpretations, all of which have evidence all throughout the film as to what the final shot of the movie meant, while having great action, while having unique, distinct, interesting action, and tying into the concept of being in Dream World. I just thought it was an amazing achievement what Nolan was able to do with his movie. Number 13, Avengers, Infinity War, Endgame, Iron Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, really the entire MCU. But as I said before, With some of these big franchises, I only allow one entry in my favorites list because I don't want these franchises to so dominate this list that I can't talk about non-franchise stuff, because I do love a lot of these big franchises quite a bit. Infinity War is my favorite of the Marvel Cinematic Universe because it just epitomizes everything that I love about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is the ability to have a shared universe with so many different characters, each of them having their own tone and vibe, but they have managed to pull it all together in a way that works and feels cohesive and doesn't feel disjointed. And it's a movie that has a great villain, massive stakes, and I love that the heroes lose at the end of it. And I think it is a movie that tells a complete story. It's about who's going to get the gauntlet, and it wasn't the good guys. It was the bad guy, and so he won. But, I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy has a very special place in my heart as such a unique, distinct film that's so personal. I think Iron Man, I love that it was our introduction to this world that I think stands the test of time. Endgame is one of the best final hours of any movie ever that just is so rewatchable, so enjoyable. It's the best fan service ever put to film. But the MCU is my favorite film franchise of all time. If you know my channel, you're probably not surprised by that. And so several MCU movies potentially could have been on this list, but I wanted to be able to talk about more things in here, so they're all crammed into this one spot right here. That will bring us to Warrior. Whenever someone asks me for a movie recommendation, I always recommend Warrior because it's a movie that came out right about 10 years ago that nobody saw when it first came out in the theaters. And I'd heard some positive buzz about a year after it came out, so I checked it out, and I just fell in love with this sports movie that's also a family drama, and it delivers all of the emotion that you want from both of those genres. But it's an underwatched film. Everyone that's seen it seems to really like this film, but it's underwatched. That's why it's a great movie to recommend to people. And it's a movie that I try and, now that I have a platform to recommend movies to people, this is the movie that I try and get people to go and watch. In a lot of ways, it out-Rockies Rocky. And it just does it takes a little while to get going. The first hour sets up all these family dynamics and the failures of each of the different characters and all this stuff, which means when you get to the last hour, it is an hour straight of payoff, dramatic payoff until you get to the end of it and you're just crying tears at this family and everything going on with them and what happens in the end. And so I love this movie. And if you're looking for a movie to watch, if you haven't seen Warrior, you should go watch Warrior. Number 11, Batman Begins, as well as The Dark Knight. As I mentioned before, Inception is sort of Christopher Nolan's storytelling magnum opus that just blew my mind. But when it comes to his Batman movies, Batman is one of my two favorite comic book characters of all time. I love comic book movies. I love origin stories. And what he was able to do in taking this character that I love and telling a great origin story and then a great follow-up that, while the one has the more simple story, but has that story of becoming that I love, and then he follows it up with The Dark Knight that has a much more complicated story that, instead of drawing inspiration from other comic book movies, draws inspiration from crime thrillers and from some of the best crime thrillers of all time, as well as some of the best source material in the comic books. And that 1-2 punch of those two films is just amazing blockbuster cinema in a genre that I love. I love what Nolan was able to do with those two films. And I put Batman Begins on this favorites list ahead because I love origin stories. If we're going more objective, okay, let's put The Dark Knight ahead. But on just pure favorites, I love the journey of Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins. And bringing us into the top 10, Rocky, as well as Rocky 4, Rocky Balboa, Creed, Rocky 2, Rocky 3, and Creed 2. Not Rocky 5, but all the other ones except Rocky 5. And I actually kind of like Rocky 5 too, but not favorites level like Rocky 5. Rocky Balboa is my favorite movie character of all time. This is the quintessential sports movie. Because it's not a sports movie, it's a character study. It's a drama about a guy who hasn't figured himself out yet, who hasn't taken his shot in life yet, and he's given that opportunity, and through it finds the confidence to find love, to find himself. And then I love that we've been able to see this character now for over 40 years in cinema in these different phases of life. And even when you get Rocky V, it's like, okay, that's a weird direction to take all of this. I love that we see this journey of this compelling character in all these different places. And even when you get Rocky IV, that's this ludicrous, over-the-top 80s movie, it's so fun and enjoyable. Rocky IV is by far the Rocky movie that I've rewatched the most times, with all of its 80s cheese, robots, and montages. It's a rewatchable film. But to me, I'd still say the best of the bunch is the original one, because it is so much. It's not about the sports, and it is about a man finding himself. Number 9, Superman the movie, as well as Superman 2. When I was growing up, there weren't very many comic book movies. One of my earliest memories of going to the theater was seeing Batman 1989, and then on television we had the Superman movies, and that is where my love of this genre that has kind of defined my life comes from. From watching my VHS copies of Superman the movie and Superman 2, that we didn't buy them because VHS movies cost like $90 to buy back in the 80s. No, we recorded the broadcast off television, so they had commercial breaks, and there were these weird extended cuts with scenes thrown in there that we didn't see again until like the DVDs came out in the zeros, and I watched them on loop. And Richard Donner took this genre that people didn't really take seriously and treated it like it was the mythology of Western culture in the United States. He took it, treated it with a reverence. They brought in, of course, amazing film composer John Williams. Mario Puzo wrote the first draft of the script. They had this epic 2-part story across the 2 movies. And yeah, a lot of it's dated now. Yeah, some of it gets campy, and the effects, of course, aren't up to today's standards. But they did something special. And they invented this genre that I love, that has in many ways defined my life, because now my career is talking about movies, and the ones that are most popular on my channel and that I love the most are the comic book movies. And it goes back to Superman the movie, and it just so much shaped who I am from a young age and what I do. Number 8, Jurassic Park. Another one of these movies where I feel like it was just the perfect age when this movie came out. I was like 12 years old when this one hit theaters, and it's just an amazing blockbuster that has incredible dinosaur effects that almost 30 years later, 28 years later, still hold up because of the blend of cutting edge CGI with the use of practical and knowing when to use each. It still looks great. And then it was Steven Spielberg in his prime, knowing how to have these great characters, having great ideas, and then when the thrills begin, how to keep you at the edge of your seat. It just combines all the elements that make for a compelling blockbuster. Part of it is also it's pulled from a great novel. The book is amazing, and the movie is a great adaptation, and each are one's great as a book, the other's great as a movie, but the music, the characters, the set pieces, I love all of it. Then we have Back to the Future. Now, I love time travel stories, and this is basically a perfect time travel story with just a incredible, timeless premise of what if a high schooler went back in time and met his parents. It's just an interesting concept that's relatable to everyone. All of us have parents. All of us wonder, what were they like when they were my age? And that's what this movie explores. And it's an example, I think, like several movies on this list of basically a perfect movie that had that lightning in a bottle casting, great concept, and then they just executed it right. Perfect amount of just weirdness in there where the mom falls in love with her own son that's like right on the edge of like, ooh, without going too far. It's thrilling and exciting without needing a bunch of explosions. It's just a lightning in the bottle, perfect film. Number 6, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, as well as Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, and Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. Might as well throw in there Star Trek III: The Search for Spock as well. I'm a massive Star Trek fan, and they had a great run of movies during the 80s, leading into the very beginning of the 90s. The best of the bunch, I think, without question, is Star Trek II. It's just a great continuation of the TV series. And because of that, it's able to tell an interesting story about an aging adventurer that's trying to figure out what to do with his life because he doesn't feel satisfied by his desk job, and he's haunted by the mistakes of his past, and they find a story to be able to tell all of that. That is a great villain. I love the practical model spaceship effects in this movie. The final battle in this movie Space Battle is one of my top 3 favorite movie space battles of all time. But as I said before, Star Trek 4, I think Star Trek 3 is an underrated Star Trek film because people say that the odd number ones are bad. I think Star Trek 3 is a great follow-up to 2. Star Trek 4 is the one that people remember as the one with the whales. It's really funny as this fish out of water comedy. And then 6 is a great send-off for the original cast that just once again explores the ideas of these aging adventurers facing their retirement. But I think they just found an amazing way to tell compelling stories with these characters as they got older that fit the characters at that stage of life, acknowledged their aging, but also celebrated them as heroes for their long careers as well. In 5th place, Aliens. There's 2 types of people in the world. Those that think that Aliens is better than Alien and those who are wrong. But who am I kidding? Alien would also probably be in my top 40 as well if I allowed 2 movies from franchises. I love Aliens and Alien.
You're going out there to destroy them, right? Not to study, not to bring back, but to wipe them out.
Ripley is a fantastic character. The concept of the xenomorphs as just these vicious predators that kill people in these isolated environment space is amazing. For my personal tastes, I like the more action-based version in James Cameron's Aliens. Likewise, I enjoy having a bit more emotional weight to the Ripley character in giving her a family that's died in her time away, as well as introducing the Newt character that she's very maternal towards. So it has a little bit more complexity to it that I enjoy. Just in general, I like James Cameron a lot more than I like the work of Ridley Scott. But any way you put it, these are 2 fantastic A+ science fiction films that I watch very regularly in my household and love both of them. In 4th place, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, as well as essentially the entire original Star Wars trilogy. But for me, the best of the bunch is Empire Strikes Back, that just takes everything that worked in the first movie and takes it to the next level. The visual effects are bigger, they're better. And while the first one is a coming-of-age story about Luke, really his origin story in a lot of ways is in this movie where it fully embraces the fact that he's a Force user. So this is the movie where he's training and pursuing being a Jedi and fails both in his training, fails in his choices, and then fails in his first duel with Vader. Add to that, you have the romance between Han and Leia. Yoda, of course, is a fantastic addition. You have one of the best plot twist reveals of all time. And I think the score here is even better. Of course, the original Star Wars is one of the best scores of all time. And this bestest it by having even more incredible music with the Imperial March, Yoda in the Force, and then the asteroid sequence when they're flying around and there's all these swelling notes. It's just one of the best combinations of visual effects, a thrilling experience with amazing music. But the entire original trilogy is so formative in my love for movies, so formative for who I am to this day. And I didn't know that some people didn't like Return of the Jedi until I was like 25 years old. I've always loved all 3 of them. Speaking of some of my favorite space battles of all time, Return of the Jedi, the space battle at the end of that one is my favorite space battle in any movie of ever, of all time, but I keep saying of all time in this video. So of ever, to give you a new phrase to use. And of course, the original Star Wars kicked it all off, and it's still a fantastic film too. But all 3 of them really are in this spot. Real quick before I give you my top 3 favorite movies of all time, remember, there is a companion to this over on my Patreon page with 10 more of my favorite movies of all time, so you can see my top 50 favorite movies of all time. Join at any level and you can unlock that video as well as all the other exclusives over there. We do a weekly Q&A on Saturdays. I have over 100 edited exclusive videos over there. And you can join at any level and unlock that. In fact, if you can do it, I think it's $21, you can get all the exclusives for the next year. You can join for a whole year for just $21, I think it is. So if you're interested in supporting the channel, if you're interested in more content, or if you're interested in sending me a birthday present, consider joining over on Patreon. In third place, Die Hard. Earlier in this video, I told you that Elf was my favorite Christmas movie of all time. I lied. Actually, it's Die Hard. That once again, it's a perfect action movie with a perfectly crafted script where everything, every line of dialogue, every little moment that happens in the first 20 minutes has significance and ramifications for the rest of the movie. It has a great hero who's a reluctant hero. He doesn't know that he's an action hero. He's just trying to do the right thing. It has a great villain in Hans Gruber, who's just a perfectly charismatic, sleazy villain who's actually in the midst of committing this big, gigantic heist. He's just so awesome every time that he's on screen. It's thrilling, it's exciting, it's edge of the seat. It is, of just straightforward action movies, I would say the best straightforward action movie of all time. Our runner-up, Raiders of the Lost Ark, as well as Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And I think these are two fantastic adventure films that complement each other very nicely. And when it comes to what are the 2 best adventure films of all time, it's these 2 films. Indiana Jones is the quintessential adventure, as he's not really setting out to be a hero. He's setting out to collect these relics for a museum, and along the way, frequently finds himself having to battle off bad guys and being pulled into being a bit of a reluctant hero while being totally willing to do it. He's not intending to be that hero at the same time. And so I think Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade finds a way to have everything you love about Raiders of the Lost Ark while adding in a father into the mix, which is the perfect dynamic to throw him off a little bit. The banter between Sean Connery and Harrison Ford is fantastic. But at the end of the day, I think the best one is Raiders of the Lost Ark. That is just such a good old-fashioned adventure film of this guy that gets in over his head on this amazing, fantastic adventure, battling Nazis, getting dragged behind a car, and an example of how to have exciting action sequences where you don't need a bunch of CGI and a bunch of cartoonish things happening. You just tell a great story about a character that you care about, and you care. You build the stakes right. You write the script right, so you care if Indiana Jones is able to get control of a car. And when you tell a compelling story, that becomes tense, exciting, urgent, without it needing to be like, the world and the whole city will blow up. No, it matters if he gets in the car. And then at the finale of the film, it's opening a box. But because they've built it right, they've set everything up right, you care about what happens. And that's when you know you've made an amazing film. But coming in first place is Terminator 2 Judgment Day, as well as the original Terminator that I also love. And to me, this is an example of how to do a sequel right, that continues the mythology, continues the characters down the path that they were on, but just takes everything to the next level and enhances and builds upon it, where the mythology gets deeper, but then it adds this emotional current throughout the entire thing about a Terminator learning what it means to be human, and Sarah Connor, who's essentially turned into a Terminator, remembering what it means to be a human and a mother. And so it has all these emotional levels to it. And it's also a story about a boy finding a father in an unlikely place. A Terminator, of all places.
Come with me if you want to live.
Add to that some of the best action of all time, with James Cameron knowing how to build memorable, exciting sequences with great characters. But of course, the original Terminator is a great small-scale thriller. In a lot of ways, it's a slasher film. It's a horror film. It's an action movie. It's a time travel story, all blended together. And James Cameron was able to do so much with so little with that film, created this great world, great set of characters. But as for what's my favorite movie of all time, it is Terminator 2. And I still remember my mom's cousin Ronnie talking my mom into letting me watch the movie when I was only 10 years old and be like, no, it's a great movie. It's actually got a lot of humor in it. And we watched it in the basement at a family reunion. And then I think the next day we watched the first one at my aunt's house. And when you have those movies that you remember so distinctly the first time you watched them, 30 years later, that's when you know you've watched something that really matters to you. And I loved this movie when I first watched it as a kid, and I love it still to this day. So it comes in at number 1. Thank you so much for tuning in for this 40th birthday edition of my favorite movies with my 40 favorite films. But there's still more. If you join over on Patreon, you can get 10 more movies to see my top 50 favorite films. Plus, you gain access to all the other exclusives over there, and you give me a nice birthday present. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.